As Carol mentioned, I worked in Unilever for 23 years. And of course, Dove is one of their best brands. But then, it took a very long time for Dove to travel outside the US. Okay? The US is where it was born. It was there for probably 20 years. And it's only when the guy who was called the children's coordinator started to go to different countries to say, you need to launch Dove, you need to launch Dove, you need to launch Dove. That they, syempre, he's visiting, parang you have to do it kasi next year when he visits again, pag hindi mo pa na-launch yun, pagkalitan kayo. So it's only then that it started to expand. Okay? The core of the product is the soap. Okay? And with the soap, they do have proprietary technology that is a competitive advantage. In fact, that's why Dove is only manufactured in two places, Germany, Mannheim, and I think they were setting up a new facility in Brazil. The liquid, which is the shower gel extension, was a natural extension because the market started to move from bars, which started to become obsolete, to liquids. But the truth is, there's no competitive advantage in liquids because the technology is such, and if you see their ad with the litmus test, you can apply that to the bar, but you cannot apply that to the liquid. Okay, but we all knew that. And I think it's good that in the company there's transparency about where you have competitive advantage and where you are just parity to the leader. Okay? Now, the big challenge was then how to grow. And so they started to extend outside the skin cleansing category. So the first extension was in also skin, which was lotions, hand and body lotions. And then they also went into face. And the move from body to face is a very difficult one. From face to body is probably easier, but you start losing your credentials. But the move from, if you're only a body product, to try to get credentials in face is very difficult. Okay? So they have some extensions in face, which parang pwede na. I mean, if they're not market leader, probably, but then they are good, let's say, skin cleansers in face. The other thing is that moving from cleansing to moisturizing is also difficult because you're a wash-off product and then suddenly you become a leave-on product. And if you start going into the depth of category understanding like that, then you'll see what the challenges are. Then they moved into hair and they also moved into deodorants. Okay? So one of the things that you have to establish, siguro, and I'm going to draw a chart, okay, which I like to use, is probably there are like three intersections. Okay? So there's the brand, there's the category, and there's the consumer. And what you want to be able to do is hit the sweet spot, okay? But then that means that there's no, you are still true to your brand, but you have to satisfy the category norms and how to enter that category successfully. And you also have to satisfy what the consumer is looking for. Okay? Now, what did Dove stand for? So it stood for mildness. It stood for care, functionally as a product, and as a brand, it also stood for authenticity. Okay, parang real, truth, things like that. It stood for, I would say, let's say, okay, real people, and those are, I would make those two different because authenticity is about a tone of voice. I'm telling you the truth. But you can have a star who's authentic. Okay, but real people means a real person like you and me, and the basis of this brand was developed also because they had a very successful testimonial campaign. Okay, which was in the US, all these people. In fact, the way Ogilvy would go about shooting the testimonials, they would get some Dove users, they would screen test them, they would give them questions, but they would never script what they said. And it's in the enthusiasm and the, parang something like, and I used Dove for 7 days, and suddenly my pastor said, wow, there's something radiant about you now. Ganyan, hindi yan scripted. And they would have to do rounds and rounds of that to get to good film. And it was an expensive way of getting their advertising. But then, that built the brand. Okay, so let's talk about if you were to enter deodorants. Okay, so if you were to enter the deodorants category, actually the whole category is built on efficacy. Okay, so how do you know, Rexona, which is another Unilever brand, will build that. But how do you then bring your brand into a category that's talking about sweat, 24-hour underarm protection, things like that. And so what they said they had to do was they had to satisfy the entry points to the category first and then talk about the brand. Because if they just talk about mildness and care, they haven't satisfied the category requirements. Okay? And then of course, the consumer, you have to take into consideration things like language, okay, whatever, visuals, things like that. Let's say habits of the category, okay, and bring those to this, let's say, to this pie chart, and then see and Venn diagram and see what of them fits. Okay, so one of the struggles we had in hair, okay, is that the hair category is a very competitive one. So of course you say, well, how are we going to compete? How are you going to compete with Pantene? Are you going to compete even with Sunsilk? How are you going to compete with L'Oreal, with Elseve, things like that. And really, I think that one of the things we were working on before I left, okay, was that that in the lineup of hair, so it can go from shampoo, which is the most basic, to they call it post-shampoo product. So that means conditioner, leave-on conditioner. There are even some hair oils like that because in certain countries like India they use oil. To things like color care, blah blah blah, like that. And really what I was saying was that parang mas bagay sa Dove all the care products, the post-shampoo products. So probably what we should be doing is skewing our communication towards that. And actually what I thought was good was that even after I left, I saw that it was the damage repair claim that was doing the most for Dove hair. Okay, so you see again that in hair, let's say, hair is all about shine. It's not going to be about shine, because that's like appearance, that's cosmetic, like that. But then let's say claims like damage repair, which in a sense was really core to Dove when it started as a skin product. It was to treat wounds of people who were wounded from the war, I think. So it was applied, and so it had that kind of medicinal, actually therapeutic advantage. So things like that, you see where you have to understand the category and the category dynamics, but see where you can have intersections here. So that will be here, let's say. But then the one that will create the sweet spot really is when all the three are combined. Okay. There. That's my spiel in marketing training terms. Okay, but then I can tell you other things about the organization, how difficult it was, like that, if you have any questions. Okay. Oh, the campaign for Real Beauty, if you want to know where it started. Actually, at that time, everybody around the world did their own advertising. And I think that it was the UK who came up with a firming lotion ad where they used size, I don't know, 10, 14 models. Okay, 14 UK size is probably equivalent to maybe 10 American size. Okay, and that was the first time, and they put them in underwear, and and then suddenly there's this like big billboard on a bus, that had that. And it was a lady called Sylvia Lanaro who was the first global brand director ever appointed by Unilever, because before the brands were owned by the different categories. Okay, so she was the first global brand director who who was given a mission to start to create a whole community around for marketeers of Dove, so that all of them, even if they were doing advertising in their countries, were very clear about the DNA of Dove. Okay? And under Sylvia, later on, she had a person for hair, a person for skin, a person for deodorants, things like that. And it wasn't easy because the people who were in the markets were not used to being told what to do. And so she would go to Japan, for example, and I remember the lady in Japan, she would walk out of the meeting, and the assistant would be absent on the day that Sylvia was going to arrive, and they would throw the market research at her and say, it's not going to work, things like that. And there are some caveats up to now in Asia. They are still trying to find the best way of presenting the campaign for real beauty because, in Japan, if you're fat, you are considered a loser. You're considered undisciplined. That means you cannot control yourself. Okay, and also for many Asians who are still emerging, they want to become beautiful. It's like, don't tell me hanggang dito na lang ako. Parang you killed naman my hope. Parang ganyan. Okay, because I work on the cosmetic side of the business also. Yung mga locks, mga bonds, ganyan. So of course, the personalities and the promises of that side of the business are different. So what you find, however, is that there is a segment. There is a segment of consumers for whom this kind of message will appeal. And maybe it won't be a big mass segment in each country, and so for example in Germany it appeals so much, that I remember I had a colleague who when I was a consultant, she came from Nivea, and she said we were super threatened by that. She was working in the Hamburg head office at the time because the tone of voice, the personality really appeals to very honest, Germans like that, with integrity, like that. And so they felt, and simplicity of Nivea was somewhere there too, so parang they were really very threatened by Nivea. Okay, so she had struggles. Some of them are political, but it was a matter of the CFO, who was a staunch supporter of hers, the CEO, who was a staunch supporter of global brands, and partly HR also like that, who then had to get together to design the organization that would work. Any questions? Ask me questions then. Yes.
Prior to your campaign for evolution, the categories is really diverse. So basically, what was the process of streamlining their categories?
Okay, so there was another thrust called Path to Growth, which in fact had to reduce from 1,400 brands to 400 brands. Okay, now what happens is, well, that is a financial exercise. We have this matrix that said, invest, I think maintain, trade, or phase out. And each brand, each of the 1,400 brands had to be put in that matrix per country, per category, whatever, so that you could do an exercise that would be very clear about what you were doing. If you were an invest brand, that means you have to spend more than the category leader. And if you are a maintain brand, then you have to spend, let's say, at par with other competitors. But if you are a trade or phase out brand, you have no marketing support. Okay, and you have to come out with, I guess, mechanisms like that, because otherwise, then it's just politics, right? So then you put the strategy in action. I think what we found is that the better brands with more coherent marketing mixes naturally surface as brands that are given priority. Okay, so what then happened is in a country like, let's say, the UK, they would rather invest in Dove than in Pond's, like that. And some categories they can compete. But then in Thailand, Pond's is so much bigger, so they would rather invest in Pond's rather than Dove, like that. And Actually, what's hard for a brand internally is that it has to compete in each category. See, so there's a master brand, right? And you can create these fantastic 1-minute films, but then there's no media budget to air it. Ganyan. And what then happens is when the rubber hits the road, the countries have to decide how much money they're going to put in it. And they say, well, I'd rather in deodorant spend on Rexona. So when I was in Asia, I struggled because Dove was not market leader in any of the categories. Okay, it was the number 2 or the number 3 brand here. It's not, they have other, Unilever here would have other priorities. Sponsors is very big. And so you do have that kind of operational, prioritization that has to go on. There's an office called marketing operations that helps to mediate between global and local, in terms of the priorities and the sequencing of launch, like that. But as a total company, it's in the top 10. And there was something called personal care 6, okay, which these are the 6 brands that globally is priority. Then there was Foods 9, so these are the 9 brands that are globally priority, like that. And if they weren't in all countries, the first thing was to launch it, okay. And then if they were in the countries already, then it was very clear that they should get more priority than other brands. And the resources behind that follow. That means you put the best people there, you put the best innovations there, you align your agencies, you get the best people in the agencies working. Another question?
Yes. Yeah, hi. I'm just curious how the campaign for Real fared in the Philippines. Was it successful? Because you mentioned a while ago about Japan, that they have a very square vision of what it is. So I think it's the same for the Philippines, like you're beautiful what skin. So I think different countries will have different perception on the campaign. So I'm just wondering how it was in the Philippines when you were.
My honest answer is I'm not 100% sure, okay, so I can give you anecdotes, but then I think it would be very unfair for me to say it failed or it was a success. Because to me, that depends on the objectives and what the KPIs were that they set out. So probably in terms of awareness, it was very high. In terms of did it launch the brand in the right way? Probably yes. Did it deliver its sales targets? I don't know because I don't know what the targets are. Okay, so if you want, ask Jul12'13. She's the personal care manager, director of Unilever. But yes, I do know that there were debates, like I remember once I was here and my friend said, okay, ano yung billboard na yan? Parang it's like you vote. Okay, I think it was also successful in terms of innovation in media, like, it was interactive, you could vote, freckles, or, beauty, whatever, dark, or what, I can't remember anymore what the choices were. But then, she was saying, is that really going to translate to sales? And I know that was her point of view, and she probably also felt like, gastusan pa talaga yan, ganyan. Okay, but then, you have to think also of, let's say, a British culture. The British culture is such that debate is good, and debate means that you are engaging, okay, with the brand. So for them, they probably also felt like, well, as long as we get attention, our products can speak for themselves because they are good products, like that. Then there's an assumption that it works. And what will happen with a global campaign is that you launch it consistently, and I think that it will get patchy results. Okay, in some areas it will be very good because there's no such thing as a global consumer, right? So it is tailored as best as possible to hit as many consumers of that segment. But then culturally, there are local attitudes and all that also play. And then there are local competitors too that also play.
Yes. It was said in the piece earlier that the marketing was split between the brand development
Okay.
brand building. So, did the other functions also have that kind of streamline? Like, for example, the supply chain.
Yeah, that's a good question. The brand, so the brand groups were organized in such a way that each of them had representatives from each function. So yes, in a sense, if you were working in supply chain, you could be attached to DUG. Okay. And if you were working in finance, there was a management accountant who was attached to DUG because the management accountant would have to compute each innovation, you know, like that. If you work in supply chain, you also had to deal with the sourcing, the bottles, the, you know, whatever, the manufacturing. There was a manufacturing person also attached to DUG. So in a way, they were trying to make the brand groups run like a company. So parang they were just like DUG Inc. within the Unilever company. And yes, it still happens. That regional resource is devoted where on a regional level and also on a global level, you do have people whose whole supply chain deliverables are attached to a brand or attached to a category. And what happens in the local market? Okay, so what happens then in the local market is that they reduce the number of maybe product development because the product development doesn't happen locally, it happens regionally. They use that money to increase their sales people, and so that they can then have a lot of activation and trade relations and go to even customers that you weren't able to go to before. So you have to kind of like start to switch the resources from one function to another. And I think that it's important that brand people kasi don't just do fluffy stuff. They have to understand the financial aspect of the brand. Okay, so what's the turnover, what's the growth, what are the margins, what's the profitability, where is it selling well, where is it not selling well, how to set priorities, etc. So to make the financial picture of each brand understood, you have to put functional people also. Okay. We work in supply chain. Yeah. Also, I think you want to capture the same category expertise. So what they find is that once you start, let's say, only operating in ice cream, you will probably won't be moving hot dogs soon. You know, like that. They try to build category expertise.
Regarding using digital media, we use a lot of YouTube and digital media in the campaign. I was just wondering how you control it and if everything is controlled. Because in San Miguel, like, I don't know with other brands, but for our brand processes, we're still hesitant in using digital media because we can't control what the people say. Like if a blogger says our bundle doesn't taste good, we won't be able to control how the message will be spread. So I was just wondering because in general the perception is positive. So if how you control the digital media or if you control it.
Okay. I can count how many times you use the word control.
Yes.
Okay? And control is not a word that lives in the digital space. Okay? I have to say that, so it's a mindset we have to change. And I was in a panel of digital experts, in fact, and that came out too. And these were banks who were saying that they're scared, you know, to create a platform because then it's open. Yes, it's open. Okay. There's no doubt that the power of digital media is effective. Okay? I'll sidetrack a little bit first because in fact I did a whole program with a brand which was for pregnant women, and what we did was we redrew the consumer life cycle, consumer purchase journey. Okay. Whereas before it would be awareness, consideration, purchase, repurchase, like that. Now it's like trigger, then aware, then trigger, and then I think it's something like, research, and then like you shortlist brands, and then you purchase, and then you advocate. You share your comments about it. So what you have to decide is where can you play in that space? Okay, where can you play in that space? But that's a whole topic of another training. Okay, but partly I think what you have to do is stand by the integrity of your products. Okay, so I know that sometimes it's difficult because many people say there are too many controls about safety and cleanliness and in fact, for marketeers, you get a little impatient with that. But can you imagine if there was a scare? All that will become transparent in digital media overnight. And so you do have to be a little bit protective. I think that if you think that maybe net, it is positive for Dove digitally, but if you look at, you Google Dove Greenpeace, okay, there was this whole film which parodied Onslaught. There's this film called Onslaught, which is about a little girl, and then she gets bombarded by all these billboards. We weren't able to show it, but if you Google it, it would have been great to see. She gets bombarded by billboards saying fat thin, fat, thin, shine hair, or fair, whatever like that. There's all sorts of claims about beauty, and then the end line is said, get to her before the media does, and then it's like Dove self-esteem campaign. Okay, so it's called Onslaught, and Greenpeace parodied it because they did an Onslaught ad on palm oil and the effects on orangutans and all this slashing and burning and blah 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 with the same music, very well done, same typography, and then it said something like, I don't know, Unilever, something, something like that. Okay, so they do it, but then then you have another department that has to do crisis management, but then it's very clear, and that's why actually anything that's controversial gets raised right away, so that the company is prepared for the feedback. Because they'll say something like, other issues, but Dove is proposing real beauty, but Axe is proposing sexy women, like that. So then the communications team will have to have holding statements, they have to be prepared for if there is a barrage. And there was a time that Greenpeace was campaigning outside the head office. They wore monkey suits, ganyan, and then they were like carrying all these like posters. So what do? We invited them in and we had served them some tea, and we lit some tea, and then we talked about it. Okay, and parang they were a little bit appeased. What Paul Polman then did was, I guess, say, we have this long-term plan, and this is where we are in the plan, and by this time, we will stop sourcing palm oil from non-sustainable sources, but this is the plan, because it's not really yet. And I think they appreciated that, and that is, in fact, documented as a good case, compared to, I think, what Nestle did on Kit Kat once, where, they just deny it, and, you don't acknowledge, lalo pag nagagalit yung tao. So you do have to acknowledge it, you acknowledge their point of view, and then if you are on board with the cause, then you can share what you're doing about it. It's hard. I think digital is a whole thing which redefines marketing, and really what happens is you can even do things like tutorials where it's the young people who are training the senior management. At least they're getting to the point where their children are already doing that at home, but in the office, they're still the ones who have to sign off the budgets. That's a whole different world. Okay, what else? Yeah.
How do you change your outcome and also market share is
Market share ng Dove? Yeah, definitely. There was success in performance measures, whether sales. A lot of it is also pipeline kasi you're expanding to different countries, so we get that. Okay. How did P&G react? I think they had to go back to Olay, which is their brand, and try and figure out what they're going to do about it. One thing good naman about P&G is they're not tempted to change their brand for the sake of another brand or a competitive brand. But they should do things like contemporize it, maybe play up some of the values and the attributes that have built the brand in the past. Maybe they look at their range, their whole range, and say, have we extended too far? Like that, are we successful? Because it's a balance. You want to extend to different categories, but then some of those we call it build and borrow. Will they help build your credentials as a brand if you extend into that category? And you are borrowing equity from your brand to play in that category, but then more and more you can, just erode your brand, right? So I think that P&G is the type that's very disciplined anyway. So, and it's kind of seasonal, it's cyclical, maybe Unilever will lose its way also with Dove at some point, because there's also one thing that maybe you need to think about. They have called conviction ads, and they have, they're like product news. So there are brand ads, and then there are product ads. Okay, and they try to have a balance of both. One very emotional and very Dove, and one that is quite functional. And if they can show a demonstration or something like that, then they would to show the product efficacy. Okay, last question. Okay.
Earlier it was mentioned that all these activities of Dove is they recreated their brand after 50 years. So what do you think is the
name?
Right, the brand or
The brand.
what's the better term?
Equity.
They made themselves relevant.
Okay, yeah.
They created their brand.
Their brand. They
Yeah,
don't say brand name because
their
the
brand.
pizza dog became something else.
What do you think is the right timing to
Do that.
do that? Like for us, Santiago or Beer Foods, is there a perfect time for that? What are the
Today.
yes?
Today is the perfect time. I don't think
so
that's
anytime.
one thing. That's not something we should wait around for. Because what happens is if your brand is weak or it's all over the place, and you continue to spend on that, then that money is just being wasted, right? Okay, so I would say that I think what's hard for companies like San Miguel Pure Foods is that it's not very clear who owns the brand. Okay, if you say FSA, okay, but then you see a marketeer like that because the buck stops there, right? But then really, in a way, if it's clear who owns the brand, who owns the master brand, for example, who will then say that's a logical line extension, but that is not, and it's either, and what happens is that you will have good marketeers who will try to do that, but they don't have the remit they don't have any authority, to say that that's a bad line extension, it's going to be harmful for the brand, right? And so there's something called a brand architecture. Okay, that's the technical term, let's say, that the marketers use to say, for example, what's core, what's extension, what is stretch, what is overstretch. And you could have an exercise like that to map all the products, around those concentric circles to say, and why? Why is that extension and why is that already overstretched? Okay? And then you start to then, it's a strategic exercise to do that. And it can be today, and it can be tomorrow. You know, so you project also that that category is something we should enter, you know, but then you have to assess two things: ability to win and attractiveness of the category. Okay? Because the category might be attractive, but can you win in that category? Because every time you spend, it's an investment. You know, that has to pay back.
Is sales a big contribution to that activity? It's always applicable to me, or is it just, because I'm thinking of one brand that we have that is not doing well, but I think, I'm not a marketing person, but I believe in that brand, and it's not doing well right now. So I've heard that they said that's architecture, as you mentioned. But it's not doing well, it's not selling well. So is it a big contribution?
So it has a weak architecture and it's not doing well. Also, maybe that's related. That's why it's not doing well, because it has a weak architecture is probably overstretched or something.
But do you think we can still,
So wait, let's go back to your question. Can sales contribute to that? Yes. I think yes, in the proper venue, in the proper workshop, when you ask what are the sales trends in the category and what are the sales trends in the adjacent categories, then sales has an input. You know, now it takes a marketeer to say that that's valuable input or that's rubbish input. So, you know, because you understand your brand like that. But then the salespeople, maybe the marketers don't go out in the trade often enough. So the salespeople will start to see, parang nakita ko, may launch si ganito, ganyan. Tapos parang the turnover is very fast, you know, and that kind of both, they write another report like that, but then their own experience and their gut feel is showing them that there's potential there or there's a threat there, like that. And so, yes, I think that they have a lot of input. Are you from sales? Okay. Okay.
Because we have a lot of good products that we've launched. Talaga nakuha namin yung market, like for example, yung Shopee Corn Beef, Kapari Norte. Talaga nag-number one kami dyan eh. But where are we right now? So parang
Hindi na sustain.
hindi na sustain kasi along the way there were a lot of cost reductions, a lot of, you know, we have to get profit, from at least the formulation ng Pilipinas. So parang yun kaya bumabagsak yung mga brands. But initially they were good brands, number one brand. Kami yung nauna sa marketing.
Okay,
So
so
do you think we can, ang question ko pala is, do you think we can revive?
Yes.
Revive?
So
Kahit nandun na yung brand sa baba ngayon.
Yeah, I'm a fan for tired old brands where you just really try and understand what is the DNA, what made them successful in the first place, and why can't they be successful again. Okay, so what I would say is that every time you salami, we call it salami when you cost, you value engineer or you do a cost reduction program, you salami it, okay, you slice off one end. And then next year, the base has now been salami, and then you salami it a little bit more. Okay? And then the base changes again, and then you reduce it again. And so, parang what happens is every time you come back to it, you forget where you started, and in 5 years' time, my gosh, what have you done to this product? Okay? Okay, I'm not saying anything because it happens in many countries, many companies. But I guess the custodians, you know, the product development people say this is what the formulation was when we were successful, and you trace it. If you just did this was formulation A, this was formulation B, this was formulation C, and then you do it and you do a sales graph. My God, you know, parang have we salamied it too much? Okay. And I think the other thing that your marketers and you have to decide is which attribute is the most important. Okay, we're going to do some consumer work and customer work with your company, hopefully, as soon as the contract is signed. But then, parang, you have to rank which of those attributes. Di naman pwede lahat. Kasi you cannot win in all. So the ones that are most important, that are really key motivators to the consumer, and the ones that have to be parang, sige, we can allow that to slip, like that because it's not an important attribute anyway, you know, then you have to have a good idea of that before you do your surrounding.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Before you go,